Hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I wanted to share with you the process I used for recovering one of my grandmother's chairs. And it's a Cricut chair, and if you're not familiar with the Cricut chair, it was a low seated chair that was produced probably in the 40s or 50s, typically out of maple, and there would be some turnings on the legs and arms and back. And it mainly consisted of, fabric-wise, a skirt around the bottom with pleats, and then there was a cushion for the seat and a cushion for the back. So as far as my first foray into reupholstering, it was an easy one to do since I already sew. So if you happen to have an old Cricut chair, then it's a great project to start with. But if not, I think there are other chairs out there that you can be equally successful with. I ended up doing one chair and a rocker, both are Cricuts, and I did the skirts a little bit different, so I'll show that to you, and I can tell you why I did it different. It was mostly just to experiment, but I also wanted to give you some tips and tricks on how to do it in a way that would be easy for you, and something I always rely on no matter what I am doing around the house is making patterns. And so this is a pattern I made from the cushion of a seat that I had already had recovered. So it was the actual chair, not the rocker. Both are Cricuts, both are very similar, and both are for grandmoms. So it was not a well-fitted seat. So what I ended up doing was taking the seat off the other chair that hadn't been recovered, and the one that had been recovered, I believe that person had made a new cushion for the seat, and it was smaller, it moved around, and it didn't cover the whole section. And I am hopefully remembering to put in photos and video over my shoulder as we speak so that you can see what I'm talking about. What's a Cricut chair? Why is one a chair and one a rocker? What I can tell you is these are two chairs that will go here in my craft room, sewing room, blogging room, YouTubing room, my multi-purpose junk room. And so it is important, since I am a short person, that it is comfortable for me, and these two chairs are very comfortable, and that this will be a good chair for sewing. I have a little table in between the two chairs where I can, keep my sewing supplies, and it'll just be really convenient and very comfortable. There's great light in this room, so right now it's a bit of a mess because, as I've mentioned before, the bathroom is getting redone. So once that is finished, it'll still be a mess because then I need some other things done in this part of the house. But hopefully by spring it will all be perfect and I can get a lot of things weeded out and sorted out and bring y'all on a little tour. But to give you an idea, so the pattern I showed you was from the chair that I started recovering. This is the pattern I made from the actual one that came with the chair, the rocker actually. So to give you an idea, they're not similar. As a matter of fact, the one that was from the remade seat or brand new seat, it's not even when you fold it in two. So it just couldn't be a pattern. And thankfully I had the other seat that I could use as a pattern, and obviously it matched up and could be used and make a great seat. So that was one pattern I used. The other pattern I used, I've hidden from myself, but it was to make the skirt pleats on the chair so that they were exactly even. And the funny thing is, on the one I'd had redone, I think they had just eyeballed the whole thing, which is fine. It didn't bother me until I realized the center pleat wasn't in the center and that drove me bananas. But on the chair that had the original fabric, it wasn't actually centered either, and they were not perfect, but much closer to perfect than the one that had been recovered. So I made just a little template of what, out of cardboard, what the back pleat was, what the inside like little tuck parts were, and then what space should be left. And well, actually this would be the front. No, this would be the front, because then you have to turn over. But anyway, I'll explain all that when we get to it. This was extra I didn't need. I just took a very long length and went for it with my patterns and ironed it in, sewed it in. But as I said, we will get to all of it. So the first thing I did, and I would think I would always do when recovering a chair, is take a lot of detail pictures of what it already looks like. So I took pictures of seams, I raised the skirt and took pictures under there. I paid a lot of attention to where there was stitching versus just folding, where the staples fell, everything I could, just to make sure that if I couldn't go back the way it was, I could do something similar that would have the same functionality. So as I have mentioned, and you've probably picked up, I was very lucky that I had 2 chairs because the one had not been touched. So I was able to see how they did a little trim piece underneath the skirt just to make it a little bit nicer looking and a little more contained so you didn't see all the seams. And I used that on the first chair. I didn't want to rip a lot of things apart in case I messed it up. They still were both usable chairs, and I have been using them. So on the chair, as you see, it is covered in a off-white fabric with big burgundy-ish red dots. And so when I put the fabric that I'd chosen, this pink fabric, over it and stood back, you could actually see the dots through. Now, as I mentioned, I didn't want to rip all that off just in case I didn't do a good job. I could always take off what I'd done and have a usable chair. So what I did instead was I took some old fabric that I had, just old white fabric left over from other projects. I made a pillowcase out of it, and then a well-fitted pillowcase out of it. And then once I put it within the cover I'd made out of the pink fabric, I saw that that took care of the see-through situation. I couldn't see the dots anymore. So I ended up on that seat. I'm trying to think. I think only on the chair did I make the coverings out of just white fabric. So I did everything twice. So what I did originally was I started with taking off the skirt. As I mentioned, I pulled all the staples. So after I took all my photos, I needed to pull out the staples that were holding on the skirt, as well as the piece of fabric that covered the actual seat portion, and that was the same fabric that the cushion sat on. Well, I did not have a staple puller other than like a office staple puller. So what I used was this very small screwdriver from my uncle JD, and pliers. So I could usually get this under the staple and then pull it out the rest of the way with the pliers. Since then, I did go ahead and invest in an upholstery nail puller, which I just got on Amazon. And the reason I did go ahead and do that, I hope it will be a faster motion than having to do 2 motions. This might be a little quicker, and I do have other projects that I do want to complete now that I have had a little success under my belt. So I don't think these are very much on Amazon. There was a wide variety of prices. This one had a pretty good rating and was at a lower price point, so I can link that for you below. So I went around, got all those staples out, So really all I had left was the bottom that I feel like the reupholster I'd used before had put in, and it seemed to be kind of like a plasticky underneath material, and then just a thick polyester batting on top of that, kind of cut in the outline of the seat. So from there, I took my cushion pattern and went about 3 inches around, not worrying about cutting in for the arms because that didn't matter at this point. So made sure it was big enough. Now, something the upholsterer hadn't done, there are 4 parts where the back and the arms connected to the seat, and so fabric, there has to be a way for, if this is the arm, the fabric to get around it, so you needed a cut. So on the first chair that I did, I looked at how the reupholsterer had done it and how the original one were done differently. And the original one had a separate little piece of fabric at each of the spots where the arm or the back connected to the seat, because there's going to be a gap when the fabric would go around it, this gap here. So I just cut 4 squares of fabric, folded them over, snugged them up around those areas, stapled them in, and that took care of that. No sewing. I didn't even serge around the edges because these chairs aren't going to get a lot of wear, but that in particular, that piece of fabric wasn't going to have any movement or stretch on it. It's just there. So then I had my big piece of fabric. So what I did in the 4 areas, one of the areas, or there were poles here too, but they weren't affected by the cushion. They were affected by the arms, if that makes any sense. But I just cut in the fabric and then folded it back and stapled it on. Didn't even sew. That easy. So I didn't go too tight because the fabric did need to have some give, or I was afraid it would fall out. So I didn't actually leave it loose either. I just set it and stapled it at a comfortable tension in the fabric. So I started at the front, went to in the middle, started and went to the back in the middle, went to one side, then the other side, and then I did the corners from there. And of course, where the corners were, there was going to be a little bit of, gather that I just let hang loose because there was still going to be a skirt over that and it wasn't going to show. So I already from college, because we did a lot of crafting in college, I had a nice heavy duty staple gun. All I did was I looked online to see what was the best staple for a reupholstery or for upholstery, and it said that the size 5/16 of an inch 8mm was best. So I ordered a box of those on Amazon, and they were just a tad longer than the staples I already had, which made me feel a little bit better because obviously the seat I was working on, and if you can see the edge of where I had removed the fabric, it had already twice had things stapled into it, so I wanted to make sure this would stay securely. Now if it falls out, it's not a big deal because I can just maybe get longer staples and staple it back in. I could, if desperate, probably hot glue it, but as I mentioned, it's not going to have a lot of wear and tear, so I'm not that worried about it. So once I had that seat covering stapled in, then it was time to deal with the skirt. So on this particular chair, I did go with the original skirt, and the only thing I wanted different was I wanted it a little longer. I believe that skirt was about 5 inches, and it just seemed a little more dated because it was so short. I wanted something a little longer, so I went with 8 inches. I think it might have even looked nice to have gone all the way to the ground. It's just where I have it positioned, and with vacuuming, that would have been probably annoying. So 8 inches was fine for me. So I actually used the selvage end, which I know you're not supposed to use, but it wasn't going to show. It's the part that got turned under and stapled, but it also prevented me from having to serge or hem that edge. Now the other edge, I did serge it and then sew it down. I don't know if you can see. So that is the serged and then sewn hem side that's gonna be at the bottom, and then this was just the selvage side that, oh, I don't know if that works, that was stapled under. And as I mentioned, I created patterns, and what I did with those little devils, I have no earthly. Let me look one place. Here they are. So you have to do what makes sense for you. Obviously, what made sense for me was to do the back pleat with where the I'm going to call them tucks, where that overlap occurs, and then the outward top pleat. So that was all face up the way I made my patterns. Well, then of course I proceeded to iron it and pin it and sew it face down. So what I did was, you can see, so you can kind of see on the outward side, my pleat was the width of this piece of stiff cardboard. So when I'm working on the back, I was able to put that where these tucks would actually come around it, and I knew it was correct if I measured this gap and it was 2.5 inches. That's probably as clear as mud to you. Maybe I can do a little drawing, which I had done. I keep notes when I'm doing stuff like this, because sometimes if you have to put a project away, you're gonna forget that you have an 8-inch, flounce or whatever it may be, especially since I was doing 2. I wanted the other flounce to also be 8 inches. So that was that. And then for the back, this was my little measure for that pleat. So figure out what makes sense for you, but this is what made sense for me. So ultimately it would have, overlapped each other where that red line is. So I pinned it, then I ironed it, then I just sewed, and I tried to sew extra careful where the gathers were so that they wouldn't pull out. So I did that with a piece that well wrapped around the base so that I didn't have to worry about not having enough or having to piece it together, which isn't a problem, as you probably know if you sew, when you have a little tuck like this, because it's easy to hide a seam there. It was just one less thing I didn't want to have to deal with. And I did have way more fabric than I needed. I had purchased, I don't know why, a bolt of 6 yards and a bolt of 4 yards. And I really pretty much only used the 4 yards, and I had some left over. What I ended up doing was I did make my final seat out of the bolt of 6 yards, just because it was going to be easier since it is a striped fabric. Don't know if you can see that, but I wanted my stripes all a certain way. I did my flounce stripes up and down, and then on the seat and the back, all my stripes went horizontal. And it's, kind of a white thread running through a pink fabric, so probably no one would notice but me, but I kind of figured if I was doing it, might as well try to do it as correctly as possible. So that was my flounce that I did. Once I had it sewn, then I went through and ironed my edge over, as you can see, and I marked the center of my flounce, the long length of flounce, the center of my seat, and that's where I started stapling. Of course, when I was stapling it on the seat upside down. So, I started, my center would have been an outward tuck, started with a staple here and then worked around from there. Now, when the back came together, I didn't want my seam to show. So what I did was one of these, instead of having a tuck, I just let it be a straight edge, and then I nestled a tuck on top of it so that you couldn't even tell that there was a connection. So it actually worked out pretty good. I just got lucky because, as I mentioned, the pleats weren't even in the originals. So even though I tried to recreate the original tucks and flounce, they weren't even. So it was kind of, Russian roulette whether they were going to match up or not. But it did work out for me. So I hope it does for you too if you're trying to recover something. So that was the skirt. And then, as I mentioned, I just, I think the back piece, I measured it because I wanted to do something easy. I just like to make life easy. I cut, instead of cutting for the back cushion, instead of cutting 2 pieces and having 4 seams to do, I cut one larger piece, folded it over, did a tiny seam, and then I only had the 3 seams to deal with. There were little fabric loops that go over the back of the seat and secure the back cushion so that it stands up. So I made those 4 right from the get-go, so that they all 4 would be made the same way. And once I had those, I used 2 for one chair, 2 for the other. For the back, as I mentioned, you just have to make sure that you've pinned those in so that when you pull it out, they're both looped over each other the same direction and same length, and will actually work on the back of your seat. Again, I got kind of lucky on that. I tested it out when they were still just pieces of fabric and pinned where they needed to be sewn together, and then went ahead and sewed them together and put them in the seat when I pinned it to get ready to sew. I did a lot of hand sewing on this project just because I didn't have a handheld sewing kind of apparatus. So for the bottom seam, I just hand sewed it real quick. On neither of the 2 chairs is it going to show because that faces down. On the 2 seat cushions, they were a little trickier because, you had this little nook out of both sides that go around the arm handle. And then there was a big gap for getting the cushion in that had to be hand sewed. But again, it worked out. I wasn't in a big hurry. For the chair, the original chair I did, I think altogether it took me maybe 2 full days of work. The first day I probably worked from 1 p.m. till 8 or 9 p.m. And the second day I probably worked, 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. So it wasn't too bad. So after I did the one, then for the rocker, I thought, well, I want to do something a little different because they're in the exact same fabric, but they're obviously 2 different chairs from 2 different grandmoms. So I decided, instead of doing pleats all the way around on the skirt, I would only put a pleat on top of where the 4 legs fell, and the rest I would just have a flat piece of fabric. I thought that might be, again, another way to update it a little bit. And so I repeated. Well, can't say that. I didn't take out any staples. I did not take the skirt off. As I had mentioned, my skirt was longer than the original skirt on the chair. So instead of ripping it off, I left it. I think I'm a preservationist when it comes to antiques and historical items. And I know not everybody is like that, but I like to leave things the way they are. if possible. So in this case, there was no reason to rip all this out. It still has the fabric strippings, underneath for the seat. It's just everything. The cushions are original, so I did not rip the fabric off those. I just recovered them. So 50 years from now, if my grandkid wants to raise a skirt and see the original fabric, they can. It also still has the label on it from when it was made. So I thought that was pretty cool. And so what I did different on this chair, the seat cushion was the same. Well, let me back up to the original chair. I didn't tell you about the seat cushion. The seat cushion I had was a little bit smaller. So what I did was I made a white covering, as I mentioned, because I didn't want the fabric showing through. And I made it just a little bit bigger than the seat cushion was. And I just took regular loose fill polyester batting and kind of created a tunnel all the way around it evenly so that it made the seat cushion bigger and would better fit the chair. Then when I made the fabric covering, I made it to the true size, and I just kind of pounded it all down, set in it, and you can't even tell that I had to build it out a little bit. It worked perfectly, and now it fits so much better in the chair, and it won't move around when you sit down and stand up. So that is what I did on that one. On the rocker that I redid second, the back and the seat cushions, they were done exactly like the first two, except for I didn't have to build out this seat cushion. I just recovered it. And again, I went around in the exact same way, did my hand stitching. On the back, I put on my 2 loops. Everything was fine. Where I did go different was, instead of ripping out the bottom, as I mentioned, the fabrics that were on the bottom, I made a skirt that is not attached to the chair. So the front from arm handle to arm handle where they attach the seat, that part is sewn, but the parts at the back are just Velcroed on. And that way, again, if I want to change it out in a few years, it'll be easy to do. But it just seemed a lot easier. I didn't have to work with pulling staples or restapling. And I must admit, if the staples do start pulling out on the other chair, I may just end up Velcroing it as well. So I had in my head a plan. I was going to sew the front and sew the back and then Velcro the 2 portions on the side. And laying in bed one night when I couldn't sleep, and this is probably why, it dawned on me that probably wasn't going to work because I wasn't sure if I would be able to get all that over I knew I couldn't get it up the legs because the legs kind of, not that much, but they go out a little bit. So chances are that wasn't, the circle created by the removable skirt wasn't going to be a large enough diameter to go over the diameter of the 4 legs. And then I started thinking of going down the top, and because of the arm handles, I wasn't sure that was going to work either. So I ended up doing Velcro on the 2 sides and the back, and it actually worked out fine. I just ordered a 3/4 inch Velcro on Amazon and sewed it on, and like I said, they're not going to get a lot of use and abuse, so I think that will work just fine. I do have reupholstered seats in my living room that are Velcroed on, and that is a place where we eat usually every day, and it's really not a big deal. The worst thing that happens, they might torque a little bit when people are seated and squirm around in their chair, but you just straighten it up and you're good to go. What is great in the dining room situation is those can then come off and be dry cleaned and put back on. So I doubt if I'll ever do that with these, but I could if I chose to. So other than the Velcroing of, that was just more sewing and more thinking, and really probably didn't even take me 2 days on the second chair. I worked a little one day and a little another day, and it was done. So I do have a blog post on this that probably has a few more pictures if you want to see those. My blog is over at kaylaprice.com, and I will have any links to the few things that I bought on Amazon. I will have those below, and hopefully there are pictures, either of the two locations, that would help you if you are trying to redo a chair. On the blog post, I have a couple of other projects I want to do, kind of a 70s, you know, where you had the square piece of wood and then you had a little fabric on the handles and the fabric seat and a fabric back. I do want to redo 2 of those into something bright and fun and maybe patriotic. I'm contemplating doing a red, white, and blue bedroom. So I had one of those in my very first house and loved it. So I think it may be time to bring one of those back. And then the barley twist chair that I sit in to put my makeup on, it has a leather seat that came on the chair, and I think that's time to put a new piece of leather in there. I've never worked with leather, so even though it isn't a big project, I do want to make sure I get the right kind of leather, and that, you know, I'm real good about if it's stapled on or however it's fastened, I do it correctly so that it doesn't come apart, because as I say, this is a chair I sit in every single day. So that is it for me for today and recovering a chair. I would love to know if you have recovered items in your home, and if so, how did it turn out? I have done a bit of slip covering in my day and really enjoy those because they're usually fast and cheap and simple, and if you tire of something, you can easily swap it out. But I'd never actually got into stapling and removing and that sort of deal, so this was a great small kind of a project to get going with. So thank you so much for being with me today. If you would, please subscribe. I would love to have you join me each week when I post a new video, usually on Sunday mornings about 8. And if you would, please comment, let me know any kinds of videos you would like to see. I kind of do everything home related. Some of it is more personal with beauty and fashion and that sort of a thing, but others are cleaning and sewing and crafting and cooking. So thank you so much for being here. I better go while I still have a voice. My sinuses are getting to me. Welcome to Texas. So anyway, y'all have a great week.